Hey guys, I'm Caroline, and I'm here to introduce Joe Boutros, who is a product manager at Indeed.com, and he works on Indeed Labs, which is basically a startup within a startup at Indeed. And we're going to play two truths and a lie about Joe. So if you don't know how that works, I'm going to say three things, and two of them are true, and one of them is a lie, and you have to guess which one's a lie. So Joe is a nationally ranked DDR player. He owns a fleet of motorcycles, and he has a cat named Cat 5. So which do you think is the lie? Any other guesses as to the lie? The motorcycles? No, the motorcycles is actually true.
It's the DDR, guys.
The DDR is the lie. He's not nationally ranked. I don't even think he can play. So yeah, enjoy Joe's talk about extremely rapid prototyping.
Cool. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So first of all, thank you everyone for sticking with us tonight. It's getting a little late. I know we just had some awesome pizza, but please no pizza comas tonight, okay? And I'd also like to just say thanks really quick to ACM just for having me out here. This has been really cool. You guys are doing some really awesome stuff here. It's good to see a community around computer science, something I wish that I had when I was an undergrad. So this is awesome. Keep it up. Anyway, like Caroline told you, I'm Joe. That's how you get in touch with me. This is actually a picture of me waiting for you to get in touch with me. So if you have questions or anything after the talk, feel free to shoot me a note and let me know. So I want to give you a little bit about my own background and how I got into the product side of things and prototyping, and then we'll sort of get into what I've learned along the way. So I graduated from college with a degree in CS, and I ended up going to work at a company, and rather than put me on the engineering team, they actually put me in their product development and pre-sales team, and basically said, we need somebody who can, sort of sit with our product managers, our UX people, and just come up with really interesting, cool new shit. And I said, okay, sign me up. That sounds like a lot of fun. And so, the first 6 months of that was like being locked in a room with a UX guy, trying to figure out the next generation of how people were going to configure and buy cars on the internet. So it was interesting stuff. Learned a lot. I very quickly learned that you don't want to spend too much time building prototypes that are static. You want them to be data bound. And I was like, oh great, I get to use some of my CS expertise here. I went from there to basically to the startup world. Worked at a lot of really tiny startups. I went into consulting for startups, both on my own as part of a startup incubator. And throughout all this stuff, I noticed a lot of patterns about the kind of work that I was doing, the kind of work that other people were doing, and that's really what I want to share with you guys today. So from there, I recently started working at a company called Indeed, where we help people get jobs, as you can see on my T-shirt. And I run the Indeed Labs team, and we're the startup within a startup, and we're really trying to figure out, how are we going to connect people and jobs, 5-10 years in the future. So it's fun stuff. It's very experimental, and we use a lot of the techniques that I'm gonna talk about in a bit here. So just a quick plug for Indeed. We're the #1 destination on the web for jobs. We serve 80 million unique job seekers every month, over 2 billion searches. We are live in 56 countries, actually, if you include Antarctica. And just as of just a few minutes ago, I checked. There's 147 jobs live on our site in Antarctica. Sorry. So if you're interested in that, that's always an option. So we work at big scale, which is a lot of fun. It's kind of cool to be able to put something out there on the web and have 80 million people try it over the next 30 days. So it's pretty fun. We're also hiring, obviously, like everyone else here. But it's a great place to work. Our engineering team is headquartered down in Austin, and I'm hiring for my team for Indeed Labs. We're hiring software engineers. We're hiring interaction designers, visual designers, product managers. So tell your friends. You can come talk to me if you want to talk more about it, or we'll have some people on campus in the next coming weeks too. So, this is you. And this is you contemplating your awesome future career, off somewhere writing algorithms. But what I think is really interesting is that there's a lot that you can do with your CS degree, and it's not quite as emphasized at the academic level, and that is building products. And this is you getting excited about the concept of building products for a living. So yeah, like I said, building products is not generally taught in school, like how to build stuff, how to build things that people want, how to figure out what it is that people want, because it's really something that's best learned hands-on, right? And so that's where we get into the concept of product prototyping. So, what is product prototyping? It's not really like a thing. It's just a name for stuff that I've been doing for a really long time, stuff that a lot of people out there are doing. But really, it's like a heuristic approach to product development. So really, learning by doing, that's really what this is all about. And when you're working on building products, especially at the very early stage, you're oftentimes trying to figure out exactly what it is that you're building while you're building it. And so this is really how that works. And if you work at an early stage startup, this is your job description. You are a product prototyper. This is what you do. And so why prototyping? As I'm sure a lot of you guys know, there's all this research in cognitive science about how your brain works and using different parts of your brain in processing the same ideas. And so your brain works differently. You're using different parts of your brain, whether you're thinking about stuff, whether you're talking, whether you're building things, or whether you're actually using something. And so in traditional software engineering, we think about how to solve problems, we talk about how to solve problems, and then we go build stuff to solve those problems, and then other people use those things. With the prototyping approach, you really want to close that loop as quickly as possible, and you want to go from thinking, talking, building, and getting people or yourself to use your stuff as quickly as possible, because you're not going to go through this process just once. You're going to go through this process many times. And with each one of these different steps, especially when you're looking at the same problem, trying to figure out how to solve the same problem, you're going to think about it in different ways, and you're really starting to unlock the power of lateral thinking, of using these different parts of your brain to try and solve different parts of the same problem. I won't geek out about cognitive theory anymore, but if that's interesting to any of you guys, there's a great book it's part of the Pragmatic Programmer series. So you guys may be familiar with the Pragmatic Programmer book. There's a book called Pragmatic Thinking and Learning, and it's really really interesting, really awesome book. It's written in the pragmatic style, and it's all about how to sort of reverse engineer the way that you think and learn about stuff. So I highly recommend that book if you're interested in that sort of thing. The other reason why we prototype is because you don't really want to waste time building something that nobody wants. How many of you guys have read this book or have heard of it or something? Okay, a few of you. So that guy, that's me, he wants you to read that book. It's a really good book, but it introduces a lot of the concepts that I'm going to be talking about today. And really what it really boils down to is, traditionally we would, think up an idea for a product, and we'd think of all the different things it can do, and we'd start writing specs, we'd start writing wireframes, we would start putting together functional documents about how this thing should work, what it should do. And so you spend a couple weeks or months doing that, and then you spend time writing code, and then you release this product. And in the traditional world of shrink-wrapped software, that's how you had to do it. You don't have to do that anymore. And so now you can actually start to gauge demand and try and figure out are you building something that people actually want to use before you're really even done building it. And so that's kind of what the lean startup is all about, and that's what, from a engineering perspective, what product prototyping is all about. So really, you want to fail fast. You don't want to spend 6 months building something, put it out there only to find out that nobody actually cares. And this is, like I said, this is a really good book, and it's quickly this like approach to product development is very quickly becoming the norm out there in the startup world. And so if you haven't read this book yet, definitely go read it. So some people think that like this is what I'm talking about here, and prototyping and writing prototype code and building fast and hacking and ship quick and break shit, that kind of thing. Like it's at odds with the traditional concept of engineering, and it's really not. I think they're complementary. If you try to follow traditional software engineering principles when you are still trying to figure out what exactly it is that you're building, you're going to have a bad time. Okay? So what are our goals with product prototyping? Really, like, you want to go for realism, not necessarily perfection. And this might sound obvious, but in practice, it's like a little bit harder to do because we're all, high-achieving, detail-oriented people here, right? So really, what your goal is, you're trying to communicate something. You're trying to communicate an idea or a vision to your users, to your investors, to your bosses, whoever it might be. And you can do that by talking to people. You can do that by making nice mock-ups and showing them. But really, the best way is to just get something that you can actually get your hands on and take for a test drive and start to figure out how does this work? How does it feel? So you want to. You really want to focus on like main use cases, right? It's really easy to get caught up in like edge cases, like, well, okay, what happens when like I get weird input from the user, or it's okay in these types of circumstances to just punt on all that stuff and actually focus on the main use cases. But make sure that you are taking notes whenever you make a decision to like decide not to solve part of a problem. You want to make sure you're taking notes, because what you're doing is you're incurring technical debt. And if what you build, if you're going to use what you end up, if you end up using what you're building, you're going to need to go back and fix that technical debt, no matter what. And if you forgot or don't care or weren't paying attention, it can be problematic. You also want to make sure that what you're building is high fidelity enough, like in terms of, let's say, like look and feel and UI and UX. You don't necessarily need to spend a lot of time on this, especially in the early stages of what you're doing. There's a lot of really great tools, and we'll talk about some of those in a little bit, that can help you get to this point. But there's a sweet spot between having enough detail so that you're not distracting the people you're trying to communicate with about the lack of detail, or spending far too much time on something and spending time on details that, not that they don't matter, but they're not core to what the problem that you're trying to solve. I run up against this a lot. I do a lot of, we build a lot of like demos and prototypes, and we build things really quickly in the labs team, and we're always showing this stuff off internally. Almost every week we've got something that we want to show people. And no matter how many times I say, sitting in a room full of engineers and product managers, and I say, okay, don't worry about the fonts we chose. Don't worry about, the lack of, UI details. Inevitably, you're sitting in a room full of, again, detail-oriented people. They're going to start saying, well, what about this little thing? And why does that look like that? Did you do that on purpose? And rather than, focusing on the actual core of the problem that you're trying to solve. And so that's, it's a sweet spot. You'll find it. But things like Twitter Bootstrap, stuff like that, can help you get there really quickly. And then you can always go back and, apply the details that you want to apply later on. The other like sort of core concept here is speed. It's the extremely rapid part of extremely rapid prototyping. So in order to do things quickly, you tend to you start doing breadth first feature development instead of depth first, right? It's really, which again is one of those concepts that sounds deceptively simple, but when you think of a really interesting feature and you're like, oh man, I can't wait to just implement this thing. I'm going to go down. It's going to take me 2 weeks, and I'm going to make the coolest avatar editor for my profile page ever. But if nobody wants an avatar editor, then you just wasted all that time. So it's okay to like stub things out and start building out pieces of all the things that you want to build, and then you'll very quickly, as you start to get feedback in this process, you'll very quickly start to figure out what pieces you actually do want to start drilling down on. So it makes sense to start with breadth and then go deep. And so like we're saying with stubbing things out, if you read the Lean Startup, there's an anecdote in there pretty early on that's like, why build a feature? Like as part of our website, let's just put a link there that says, hey, this feature is available, but it doesn't go anywhere, and we'll just measure how many times people click that link. You could do that, but I think that's a way, it's dangerous. Number one, it's dangerous. Number two, it assumes that you have more than one shot at the same users, and if you don't, then you may have just blown your shot. So I think it's best to make it feel real, but functionality stubs are okay. And so, like, what do I mean by functionality stubs? Like, maybe you have some sort of like complicated like accounting process that has to happen, or billing process that has to happen between two users. Like, I was consulting with some people actually, like about a year ago, and they were working on this system where it was like sort of peer-to-peer knowledge exchange, but it was for money, and there was all these like rules around like, you'd have this by the minute rate to talk to people. It was this like whole micro consulting thing, and it was pretty cool. But like, they were really focused on, okay, we have to encode all of these business rules, even though they weren't sure what exactly they were all going to be. We have to encode all these in this payment thing, and it's really important because this is handling all our money, and this is how we want to make sure that it's like really solid how people get paid. Well, in the meantime, they didn't have anybody using their product yet, right? And so we sat there and we were talking about it, and we said, well, why don't we just log all the transactions that are going on, and then at the end of every day, we'll just go, we'll look at the log, we'll manually calculate what billing thing has to happen, and we'll just do it on the back end. And so that's what I mean by functionality stubs. So to the user's perspective, it works as advertised. And for you, until you reach the point where you actually need to scale that process, it's okay that it's manual. Nobody needs to know. The other thing with speed is not to repeat yourself. And this is a really popular concept. It's actually, I think it first came from the pragmatic programmer. It's been like sort of brought into the Django community, and Django is something we'll talk about a little bit too. It's one of their core principles, and it's really like, I think it should be more expanded than that. Don't repeat anyone, right? When you're at this stage in the game, you don't necessarily need to, like, again, we'll talk about like user registration. Like, there's a lot of different things you can do with user registration. Somebody else out there who's probably pretty smart and has already done a lot of that stuff, it's okay to just leverage their work until you actually have a pressing need to do something different, and then go for it. Build your own user registration flows. So again, you want to focus on the highest value stuff, which is basically what makes what you're working on unique, right? User registration is not going to be what makes your product unique. Your product is going to be what makes your product unique. So a little anecdote I can share. We like, and just this actually kind of underscores how like, how difficult this can be sometimes. Like, we do hackathons. We host hackathons at Indeed, and we had one maybe 6 months ago, and there was a team that was building. Most of the teams were doing software stuff. There was one team that was building like a telepresence robot. We have some offsite team members, and they wanted a little robot that they could drive around the office with their face on it and like go video chat with people and stuff like that. So it was a really cool idea, and like everybody really wanted to see this thing succeed because we wanted to use it in the office. And so fast forward to like 2, 3 in the morning, right? And they're putting this robot together, and they've got this like driver board that's actually communicating via Wi-Fi and actually driving this robot. And they like hooked something up in reverse, and they blew like a component on this board. And obviously, like, they were a little upset because it was 2 in the morning, and you can't really go, to the store, and Fry's wasn't open, so we couldn't go like replace it. And so these guys started like getting really theoretical about this, and they're like, okay, well, the component that we blew, and this stuff's way over my head, so I apologize if this sounds like nonsense to you, but it was some sort of component, it was some sort of like specialized transistor, and they said, well, if we get, these other two transistors that we can salvage from this other board we have, we could hook them up in such a way that it would like simulate the same behavior as this other thing, and then we just sort of like surface mount, like de-surface mount solder the other one and put this one in its place, and we should be good to go, right? Yeah, I mean, that's a fun problem to geek out on, right? But like not appropriate for when you're trying to like build something and get it done in, in a matter of hours. And meanwhile, they had a perfectly good Arduino board sitting, right next to them that they weren't using. And so I went over to talk to them. I was like, guys, like you gotta, like this is fun. Save this for lunchtime discussion tomorrow, and like let's get this thing done. Let's get this thing launched. Needless to say, the robot, kind of didn't really make it into production, as it were. But it's a good like warning story, because it's when a technical problem like that arises, your instinct is going to be to like just dig into it and like get to the bottom of it. And sometimes you have to take a step back and say, is that really what I need to be doing right now, or is there more valuable work I can be doing? And that's the part of this that is like that I said, it sounds deceptively simple, but it's really easy to get trapped in there. So all this stuff I'm talking about like not knowing what you're building until you're actually building it, it's sort of it underlies the concept of the pivot, right? So this is a concept of, just about like companies or startups who are building stuff who end up making things that are totally unlike what they were originally making, right? So Instagram. Everybody knows what Instagram is, right? Instagram started off as bourbon. I hope I'm saying that right. There's a few vowels missing. Which really was like, it was a Foursquare clone. And it was like the only thing that made it special was that it was like all in the browser. It was all HTML5. And, it was okay. But like Foursquare was taking off. Gowalla was like a distant second. And nobody really cared about bourbon. But they had these like, the people who did use bourbon really liked the photo like sharing tools that they had. And so they said, well, maybe we're onto something here. And so they threw away the rest of bourbon, and they focused on building the photo sharing stuff and turned it into Instagram. And you can see they hit on something that was successful. That's a successful pivot. So ironically, also in the photo space, just many years before, so in startup years, like I guess, I don't know when Flickr first came into being, maybe like 2008. So in startup years, that's like 100 years, right? But Flickr, that we all know and love, is online photo sharing. Started off as Game Never Ending, which was this MMO, massively multiplayer online game that I guess had some really loyal users, but again never really had much success. Didn't really hit it big, but again like they had some features in there which ended up becoming the genesis of Flickr. And they said, well, maybe we should just put the game aside for a little bit and we should focus on this like social photo sharing thing we've got going on here. And they did, and it was very successful. Yet another pivot. Does anybody know what Pair is? Okay, so Pair is a social network for couples. And it's like this, you and your partner are the only two people, and you can just communicate with each other all day long using like different mediums, and it's like sickly cute, okay? So the interesting thing about Pair, and this is something, I don't think that they talk about this, that they've really mentioned this publicly, but I've heard from some people who know the guys who originally did Pair. They actually started off building this like real-time mobile collaboration software that was like around like in like the engineering space. So being able to collaborate, multiple people to collaborate on engineering software at the same time in real time, right? And so they were like all from out of the Bay Area, and they were doing Y Combinator, and they're in the Bay Area, and they like ended up they were all in long distance relationships, and they were having trouble like staying in touch with their significant others back home. Needless to say, their real-time mobile engineering collaboration software didn't really go anywhere. But all that real-time like device-centric work that they've been doing, they were actually able to roll into pair under the guise of something called the thumb kiss. So the thumb kiss is you have two phones here, right? And you have one person puts their thumb on the phone on the screen, the other person puts their thumb on the screen. You kind of see a shadow of where the other person's thumb is, and every time your thumbs overlap, it vibrates because you just thumb kissed, right? Like I said, sickly cute, right? But it just goes to show, like they did not start out building anything remotely like that. But they looked around and they said, okay, well, really, what's they just looked around them and said, this is what we want to do. This is the problem we're actually facing right now. Here's some technology we built. We can roll this all in together, and like, it's a thing, and it's kind of cool, right? So, how do you do this, right? Like, how do you build stuff? How do you get like, you're so into what you're building and what you're doing, and then how do you like handle this whole concept of pivoting, right? And like I think the secret is that you have to have like really strong opinions about what you're doing. You have to be really, really, really passionate about what you're building. People are going to call you crazy, and you kind of are, but that's okay. You got to do it anyway. But just as important as having strong opinions is having weak attachments to those opinions, so that when you're wrong, because you're going to be wrong, it's okay to just walk away, right? Your ego doesn't get in the way. You don't keep trying to go. You know the term death march. You don't want your startup experience to turn into a death march. I've been there. It's not fun at all. So that's how you handle the pivot. And if you don't do it that way, this is kind of what you end up with. So this is the Homer. And so this was like an episode of The Simpsons where Homer Simpson was given the like authority to design his own car for a car company, and like he couldn't say no. He had all these great ideas, and he couldn't say no, and he just wanted to include all of them into what he was doing, and that's what he ended up with. Obviously, which was a commercial failure. So that's not what you want. So let's switch gears a little bit, and let's talk about like tools and techniques that are going to help you when you're going through this process. So here's a lot of them, right? So I think what's very important, especially if you're working on the web, is to use a web framework. Web framework is just a way to a collection of libraries and utilities and shortcuts that help you do common things that web applications need to do. There's both server-side web frameworks like Django, like Rails, like Spring if you're into Java. And there's now a lot of client-side web frameworks that are all JavaScript that actually all work in the browser, like Backbone.js, things like that. There's another one I didn't put on the slide called Meteor.js, and you should check it out. Also, Dart, Google Dart, if anybody from Google's here. So UI toolkits, so things like Bootstrap, it gets kind of a bad rap because everybody uses it, and then all your sites end up kind of looking the same. But it is really easy to go from zero, especially if you don't have like good visual design skills. Like it's really easy to go from zero to something that looks like somewhat passable in this day and age using something like Twitter Bootstrap. Same thing goes with like jQuery and jQuery Mobile. It makes a lot of like the JavaScript stuff, like dynamic UI stuff that you're going to want to do, much, much more accessible. In terms of like databases, I use mostly MySQL. I'm starting to switch over to Postgres. The things that the Postgres team are doing these days are really, really, really cool. And so I put Postgres up there, especially if you have a Mac. You can just install Postgres.app, and you just have a fully running version of Postgres with no problem. It's really, really easy. There's a lot of obviously work going on in like the whole NoSQL, schemaless, document-oriented database world. Mongo is a great tool for that. The schemaless stuff, while it doesn't play as nicely with the server-side like ORM-driven frameworks, it does allow you the flexibility of when you're building stuff over time, your schema is going to change. The kind of data you're interested in is going to change. So it does allow you a little bit more flexibility there. Things like hosting. Heroku Heroku is doing some amazing stuff where they are building this layer on top of things like Amazon Web Services, where you don't even you're abstracted away from the server. All it is your application. You just build your application in a certain way, and you push it via Git to Heroku, and boom, it's live. That's all you need to know, is that it's running on the internet, and you don't need to doesn't matter how, doesn't matter why, and there's a little lever on their website so you can scale it. It's kind of cool. Distributed version control. Do you guys use Git? Anybody use Git? Cool, good, everyone. Thank you. It's like we're especially at Indeed, we're like our engineering team is on Subversion, and it can be painful sometimes. But yeah, Git is a great way to move fast, and especially being able to create your own branches, local branches and things. It's a great way. There's a lot of really cool deploy processes, like I mentioned Heroku, and a lot of others that are actually tied into the Git workflow really well. So it's a very cool tool to use. There's also all sorts of other really cool things out there. PhoneGap is a way to. Do you guys know what PhoneGap is? Anybody? A couple people. So for those of you who don't know what it is, it's a way to build native smartphone applications using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So you can build. If you're familiar with web development technologies, you can build apps that have access to native APIs on a phone, whether it's Android, whether it's iPhone, whether it's an iPad, and it's a write once, deploy to all platforms thing. And so you lose a little bit of the whole the native experience, but it's a really easy way to get something on a phone. You want to get your app on a phone and get people using it and make it look native. That's a good way to do it. Also, there's something called Parse, which is I personally never used it, but I'm very intrigued by the concept. And it's basically a backend as a service. And so say you're building a web app that's like a single-page web app in a browser, or you're building a mobile app, and you need some kind of CRUD backend. You know what CRUD means? It's creates, update, deletes. What's the R stand for? What does the R stand for? I'm seriously blanking. Read. Thank you. Thank you. And so you need a CRUD backend to be able to store data and manipulate data, but you're really just using it, as a data backend. Parse is a backend, CRUD backend as a service. So you can spend all your time building the logic that's in the front end of your app, and then just exchange messages with Parse in order to store data. Easel.io is a very cool UI prototyping, in the browser UI prototyping tool that actually lets you build web UIs, rich web UIs, not wireframe style. Lets you build rich web UIs and actually just hit an export button, and exports it all out as HTML and CSS. Really, really, really cool stuff. So there's a lot of people out there. I think the moral of the story is there's a lot of people out there who are trying to make your lives easier. So let them. So one quick note, I got to throw this in there because I'm a Django guy. But seriously, Django, okay? Let me just tell you really quickly. I don't want to ignite some sort of religious holy war or anything like that. But let me just tell you why I really like Django. And obviously reason one which isn't even on here is because it's Python, and I love Python. But the cool thing about Django is that it's sort of like this opinionated web framework, but it's not opinionated enough to force you down a certain way of doing things. They give you all these really cool tools, like things to do form processing, things to do URL routing, things to do user authentication, data administration tools, right? They give you all these tools that you can use right out of the box, usually with 1 or 2 lines of code. And those tools are usually pretty good to get you 80% of the way there. But you're going to inevitably outgrow those tools, right? You have to. They're not designed with every single use case in mind. They couldn't be. So when you do outgrow them, there's supported and easy ways to customize all that stuff, or to replace it with something of your own doing. So it's a great way, if you think back to all this prototyping stuff we're talking about, it's a great way to just get started with something that works, and then once you've decided on a direction that you want to take it, you have all the freedom in the world to customize it. So seriously, Django. So let's talk about some techniques. And so like building on top of APIs is kind of the first thing. Like it's easy because like whoever wrote the API is hopefully doing a lot of the work for you. But let me give you like an example of how an interesting way that I used an API to solve a problem that I had at my day job. So we were talking a lot about like how we want to be able to let people like pull their phone out of their pocket and just like immediately see jobs that were close by to them, like physically nearby to them. And that may I know that might sound a little weird to this audience, but imagine you're somebody maybe who works in like retail or in food service, and that you can see how that becomes actually fairly interesting. You're somewhere, you have some time to kill, you pull out your phone, you're like, oh, I could go apply for a job right over there. So the problem was that the way that we gather all this data, like we don't always have very reliable location information about where jobs are. Sometimes we only have it to the zip code level. Sometimes we only have it to the city level. And that's something that we're working on, but it takes time in order to sort of build up that data. And if you don't believe me, look at this whole Apple Maps versus Google Maps fiasco. Location is hard, okay? So we thought and we thought and we thought, and we're like, okay, well, how could we do this? And so we actually we started using the Foursquare API. And so we basically said, okay, when you pull out the phone, we're going to geolocate you. And then we're going to send that location to Foursquare. Foursquare is going to spit back like a list of places, like whether it's restaurants or offices or anything that people have checked into that are nearby. They've got that location data. We get that back, and then we query based on the names of those companies and the like city that you're in. And it actually ended up working out really, really well. So you can sit in our office and we pull this thing out, and it shows you that Panera Bread is hiring across the street. The liquor store across the street has job openings. Like it actually works. And so we could have sat there and said, well, okay, we're going to keep improving our location data, but we found a way around it. Now, to be fair, that's not something that we've like put out into production or anything yet. But it was a really effective way to demonstrate this concept and to like decide this is something we wanted to do. Third-party libraries and modules. I kind of already talked about that, but the classic example I always love to give is user authentication. You can spend an eternity working on user authentication. Like, you want to handle password recovery, you want to handle account verification, emails. You want to handle OpenID support for like Facebook and Twitter login and GitHub login and all that stuff. You want to support like account security questions. Like the list goes on and on and on. None of that stuff is core to your product, or I mean maybe it is, but it shouldn't be. And there's other people who really like working on that stuff, and just let them do the hard work. And so really like what we end up with. Especially like when using a lot of third-party libraries, and you'll get this a lot with the web frameworks. There's like tons of everything's pluggable and replaceable, and it's very fun. But you end up like you have an idea. You're like, I want to start putting code to paper on this thing, and you end up with like 80% library code, and that you've sort of like had to write some glue code to like put together to do what you want, and then like you get to actually focus on that 20% of the code that's actually the thing that you're doing that's unique, that's actually interesting, that you want to test, that you want to prove. And really like it really does end up being like 80-20 sometimes. It's pretty striking the number of things that you can waste time on when you're building products. Another thing, I talk about stubbing out functionality. You can also like punt on performance problems. Cache is really cheap. If you've never used memcache before, it's like it'll change your freaking life. Okay, especially if you're using the like web frameworks with ORMs that are doing a lot of database queries, and you don't really have time to go like tune them and figure out exactly what's going on, stick a memcache in front. Memcache is just an in-memory key value cache, and you can pre-compute a lot of the stuff that you want. It's incredibly fast. So things that used to take a long time, if you had to hit the database every time, you can now grab very, very easily, very quickly from memcache. So it's a good way to be able to say, okay, I know there's a performance problem here. I'm going to devise some kind of caching solution around it. All it takes is more RAM. RAM is pretty cheap. and I will get back to this later. But again, make sure you get back to it. It's very important. Other techniques, things like responsive design. You guys know what that is? Responsive web design. So being able to be mobile on day one, that's becoming very important, right? I mean, there's a lot of products out there that are mobile first or mobile only. We have a lot of users. We're now seeing like a very significant amount of users that are mobile only, which is a bit surprising to me. But it's I suppose it's not really surprising, but it's happening a lot faster than I thought it was going to happen. And so responsive design is just a way that you can say, okay, well, it's the same markup. I'm just applying different style rules based on different attributes like the size of the screen, the pixel density of the screen, the orientation of the device, things like that. And so you end up, if you want to see a really, really good example of this, Microsoft.com just relaunched. And they've done an awesome job. And so what you can do is you can just open your browser and to Microsoft.com and just start dragging the window and make it smaller and make it smaller and make it smaller and see what happens. And there's a breakpoint at the tablet size when it turns into tablet view. And then there's a breakpoint at the smartphone size when it turns into smartphone view. It's pretty cool. It's not a silver bullet, though. It's just like Django. It's one of those like 80% solutions that'll get you there, especially if you have a lot of content in your application. The interactions don't always follow properly. So if you have something that's very highly interactive, especially the difference between click interactions and touch interactions, they don't always translate 100%. But it is a good way to have your app or website or whatever be mobile ready on day one. Other techniques, just like think like a hacker, like just manipulate existing stuff. So here, this is like a very concrete example I can give you. Like this is in our resume product. This is how you. This is what you see when you want to go contact somebody. You see this email form, and we don't actually share people's emails when they upload a resume to Indeed. We don't share their email address with a recruiter. We broker that first contact to protect job seekers from spam and from just bad dudes in general, right? But a lot of these recruiters were saying, well, we want, that's great, that's nice you have this thing and everything, but we just want people's like email addresses and phone numbers because we just want to call, I just want to call you, I just want to call you, I just want to call you. So we heard that over and over again. We said, okay, well, we can build the same sort of thing for phone, something where we broker the first contact, and then if you want to share contact details after that, it's up to you. And so we decided to build this thing using Twilio. So we had the idea, and we actually did this without a single, without any help at all from the team who actually works on, the engineering team who actually works on Indeed Resume. And we built this thing, and at first it was a bookmarklet. It was just a little bookmarklet. You click this thing, and it would load some JavaScript, and it would inject this UI into the page and make it fit seamlessly. And we gave it out to a few recruiters, and we said, okay, this is kind of weird. You have to click this link, but they did it. They liked it. We eventually got we sort of wrote it as like a third-party JavaScript thing. We got it included into the product. We got it expanded out into a larger test group. It's testing well. We're going to eventually roll it into our product. That's the sort of thing where like we did that. We basically said, let the engineering team keep doing what they're doing. We want to try out this kind of crazy idea and see if it works, and it did. And then once we've sort of perfected it, we said, okay, great, go build it. So you can do this with bookmarklets. You can do this with browser extensions. There used to be this thing called Grease Monkey where you could do user scripts on the web. It's good stuff. So with that, I guess I just want you to remember one thing from this talk. So if you go after this and go, it sounds like there's a lot of fun activities planned. So if you start to forget things, but you remember one thing, remember this, that building products is an art. It's something that you really, you're going to learn it by doing, and you're going to be bad at it at first, and then you're going to get better, and you're going to get better, and you're going to get better. If you remember two things, it's that building products is an art, and that you shouldn't repeat yourself. And if you remember three things, it's that building products is an art, you shouldn't repeat yourself, and that the key to happiness in the startup world is to have strong opinions weakly held. that's all I got. So again, if you guys are interested in coming to Indeed, this is us on a Tuesday going to get the best barbecue in the state of Texas, Franklin Barbecue. But if you're interested in coming and helping us help people get jobs, please let me know. That's all I got. I'll open up to questions. If you guys have questions. Oops, we'll put that back up. No questions? Question.
What do you think of Google Dart as a replacement to JavaScript, especially with like rapid prototyping? Would it help or hurt?
I think yes, it absolutely will. I think that it's still a little early to tell, but I learned a lot about it today here, just like you guys did. But it seems very cool, and it seems like the kind of thing that somebody should have done a long time ago, right? The whole we are abusing HTTP, we're abusing the DOM, we're abusing JavaScript to do all of this cool stuff that we're doing on the web today. It's about time that somebody sort of took a blank page approach to this, and I think if anyone can pull it off, it's Google.
So when you're figuring out what's worth building end to end, do you sort of just pull your existing users, or do you do like A/B testing live, or like
we do both of those things. So we use there's another service actually I should have put up on that slide, but we do A/B testing. We have our own sort of homegrown way of doing A/B testing, but there's things like Google Website Optimizer, there's Optimizely, stuff like that lets you sort of programmatically do it. There's also there's a service we use called usertesting.com, and if you're not familiar with it, it sort of takes the idea of like used to be user testing. I don't know if you guys anybody watch Mad Men, the TV show? So there's like that scene a couple seasons ago where they're like testing out the lipstick shades, and there's like that one-way mirror, and they're watching. Like people actually do that. Like I have done that in my career as a software engineer. Like sat behind a one-way mirror and watched people like use a website and like ask them questions and that kind of thing. You don't have to do that anymore because of the power of the web. And so what you can actually do with usertesting.com is basically make these like tasks, and people will go to this website and they get paid like $10 to install this browser plugin that records their screen and records their voice, and they go through the script. And so you can tell them, you can show them something. Sometimes like we show them stuff on our live site. Sometimes we show them prototypes. And we ask them to, complete a set of tasks, and we like, see, okay, where do they have trouble? Was this thing clear? We can ask a couple questions afterwards. And so that's a really great tool. If you have enough traffic so that your A/B tests can be statistically significant, then A/B testing is another great way to do it. I prefer a mix of both because A/B testing doesn't really give you like the holistic view on what it is you're doing. It lets you like, optimize certain things in certain ways, but you don't really get that chance to step back and say, okay, but does the whole thing still make sense? So I think it's a good combination of both. There's a great quote I saw somebody like tweeting around the other day that said something like, A/B testing is A/B testing. Oh gosh, what is it? A/B testing will get you to great, but it'll never get you to awesome. That kind of something like that. I butchered it. I'm sorry. Any other questions? Yes.
So I've been trying to like look at Python web frameworks and choose which one is like good. So Django has like a lot in it, but I'm also kind of a fan of minimalist web frameworks like Flask.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what you think about that. Would Flask be good if you're trying to rapidly prototype something, or would Django be best for pretty much everything?
So I think they both have their place, and I use both. So Flask. The question is like, what's the take on like micro frameworks like Flask or Bottle versus a more full-featured web framework like Django? And so basically, if like Flask doesn't have an ORM, Flask doesn't have a lot of the like sort of tertiary stuff that Django has, and so if I don't need that stuff, sometimes maybe Django's overkill. And so we do use Flask for a lot of stuff, especially like really like simple apps. But the more it's hard to build big apps in Flask. It's definitely doable, but there's a lot of things in Django in terms of like how they enforce like the sort of stylistic things that they enforce that make it a lot easier. That being said, like a lot of the Flask people, you talk to them and they say, well, that's because you shouldn't be building giant monolithic web apps. You should build a lot of little web apps that talk to each other and that sort of thing. So, I think there's a place for both, and so I think it really depends on, I think for me, the heuristic is, am I going to use the ORM or not? And if I'm not going to use the ORM, then I'll probably start with Flask, and then maybe we graduate to Django. If I'm going to use the ORM, then I'm Django from day one. Yes? In the back?
Is there any sense in, since you guys just got acquired, in a change in Indeed Labs or anything like that?
Excellent question. So, look, for those of you who didn't hear the question, the question was, Indeed was recently acquired a few weeks ago, and is there going to be any sort of change in Indeed or Indeed Labs? There's no plans to change anything. Indeed is operating just as it was before, as like a sort of wholly owned subsidiary of another company. So that's good news. And so especially with Labs, I actually think, it's my own sort of personal opinion that now Labs is even more important. That instead of a 600-person company, we're now a 22,600-person company. So, culturally, we've always wanted to. We want to be the startup that figures out how to cannibalize our own business, and so we still want to do that. Yes.
I'm not sure if you can answer this, but maybe you have experience or know of someone who has experience with this. Like, say you have a prototype and you began developing it in, say, Ruby on Rails, and, you like it, but, there's more flexibility in other frameworks such as the Django. How expensive in terms of time would you say? I mean, I know this all varies on the project and all, but, like, porting it from one framework to another.
I don't think I could give you such a quantifiable answer, but generally, like all those Rails and Django specifically both follow the MVC, design MVC-ish design pattern, on the web, and so that means that a lot of the way that you do things is going to be similar in both frameworks. So it makes it kind of like the logical components of your application will transfer over, maybe not exactly one-to-one, but fairly well. You're still going to have to rewrite all that code from Ruby to Python. But in terms of do you have to totally rethink or re-architect your app? No, shouldn't have to. Other questions? Yes?
How long does it generally take you to complete one prototype so that it's ready for testing or showing off to other people?
If we're testing and showing it off internally, sometimes 2 days. If it's something that we want to put out in front of users, we take just a little bit more time just to make sure that we don't ever want to show somebody something that's going to break or that is broken. So we'll take a little bit more time, but usually a day or two, we can get a rough idea of, we've sort of painted it with broad strokes, and we can actually start to do that whole zeroing in on the direction that we want to take it.
Having the idea all the way through completing the end product that you're showing off, or is there some kind of brainstorming session that happens and then you go and create those all in 2 day segments?
No, I think it's like from having the idea, because it ends up being this deterministic experience where you build something and then you look at it and then you're like, okay, now I know what I want to do for the next part of this, and now I know what I want to do for the next part of this, and so it doesn't always make sense to sit there and think of here's all the different things we want to do and then go. We just sort of we have an idea, you kind of want to capture, there's this enthusiasm or excitement when you have a new idea, and you kind of want to capitalize on that. So we like to get working on stuff really quickly. I was just talking to somebody on my team on Friday, and we came up with an interesting idea, and he's like, oh man, I'm gonna like work on this for the rest of the day. If that's okay. I said, great. And I said, can we demo it on Monday, you know, for the bosses? And he said, sure. We're gonna do it. So yes.
So I had actually a similar question. I'm kind of surprised that you didn't really mention storyboards or wireframes, and I understand you kind of jumping right into it. Would there be a different kind of context or a different situation where you actually would recommend, you know, sketching things out on just a piece of paper before building things?
Yeah, definitely. I think I think a lot of it comes down to like personal preference and you know, sort of like using some people's brains work better when they're talking. Some people's brains work better when they're writing. Kind of goes back to the whole like cognitive theory thing I was talking about earlier. And so for like my own style and the type of people I tend to bring onto the team, like that's not we haven't found that to be as effective as just going with it. But that being said, I mean, yeah, like whiteboard is your best friend, right? You're gonna like there's definitely some level of, you know, we want to kind of sketch this out and the flows and erase this and okay, maybe this arrow points down here now and we eliminate this one step and but yes, like any way that you can take your idea and like sort of visualize it, whether that's through code or through writing or through drawing storyboards, it's gonna tap into that the same power that we're talking about here. Yes.
So are all of the people who are on the prototyping team, do they all write code, or is there some who are like specializing in user interface and that kind of thing, or is everyone?
We do have people who are like more on the user experience side, and like their output tends to be, rather than like Photoshop documents, it tends to be like HTML and CSS and stuff like that. But yeah, I think the theory like works across all disciplines. Definitely. Yes.
Yeah, so in the lean startup, like Eric Rees talks about implementing like feedback loops, especially for a startup. Do you kind of integrate that at the prototyping level, or does that come after once you've built these features?
Yeah, it depends on what it is, but yeah, like we show things off internally a lot. So we're not always like there's also stuff that's like live but only for internal like users, and so we have this like, you know, built-in test group of people at Indeed. But yeah, I mean, like I think it's critical, right? Especially if like, so a lot of times the first audience for our stuff is internal. If you're the first audience for your stuff is external, if you're doing like that early stage stuff, then yes, it's very, very important. And it goes back to the whole thing we were talking about where, you know, you don't want to spend time building something that people don't actually want to use. Even though you might think it's the coolest thing ever, like, you know, if people aren't interacting with it or people aren't using it, either you need to rethink your approach to it or you need to not do it. So yes, feedback loops are very important. Anyone else? Yeah.
So kind of on that line, I was wondering if you have any tips on identifying what problem to solve. So pretty much the market opportunities. It seems that like the main kind of idea here is that you just start with something and then you just switch until you get, you know, positive feedback.
Yeah.
But any tips on picking that first one, especially if you're the student, right, and you're just starting out?
You know, pick something that you're interested in, right? Even if it's something that someone else has done, but you still think is a cool idea, you might be able to do better. But really, I mean, I think it comes down to what is something that you're going to do because you find like intrinsic benefit or intrinsic joy from doing, rather than something, you know, that you're going to do because you think it's what people want you to do. And so you kind of start at that point, and who knows where you'll end up. But I think that's most successful teams start with something that's really near and dear to their heart, especially like in the early stage of things. Like you're spending a lot of time that you sometimes don't have, right? And you have to make trade-offs to focus on a project so wholeheartedly that it really should be something that you truly care about.
So it's kind of the other way around than what I thought, which I appreciate. Saying first find what you would love to do, and only after that find if that overlaps with anything that could be, valuable business.
Yeah. And because if you do this right and you really truly listen to what the feedback you're getting from users, not necessarily from like people you talk to, but from people who are actually using your thing, whatever it may be, it'll get you on that path to building what people want, and hopefully in the best of cases it still has some essence of something that you're really interested in, that you're really passionate about. Yes?
What's the biggest challenge of your job, and what percentage of the things that you create actually end up getting used? And then
those two questions are very related. I like to tell people on my team that if 9 out of the 10 things that you do end up in the trash bin, then like we're doing it right. We're thinking out far enough ahead. So it's tough sometimes to to believe in something, but have to put it aside and move on to something else. And so I think that's probably the toughest part. That, and just like sort of transitioning, like it's a very creativity is not something that is always like on tap, is always available just like at the snap of a finger. And so sometimes it just comes to you, and sometimes you have to wait for things to come to you. And that can be tough too when you want to be making progress on something, but you're sort of blocked until you have that sit bolt upright in bed in the middle of the night moment where you're like, I got it, I figured it out. Yes.
Your rejection rate is 9 out of 10 of your target rate. Do you ever find yourself revisiting previously rejected ideas months after the fact and find out that it's actually a good idea?
Yes, definitely. Sometimes it's not the right time. Sometimes it's not the right audience. Sometimes we'll learn something in a later experiment or later product where we take it back and we say, that's the thing we were missing from the first time around, and we'll put stuff back out there, definitely. Yeah, don't ever throw anything away, right? Just put it on the shelf. That's why like good source control and everything is very good, because you can go back and find a project you worked on, a year ago, and hopefully be able to fire it right up. And we have a very we have this like internal deployment system for labs that basically is modeled after like the Heroku way of doing things. So it's all this sort of like declarative code around like how we deploy stuff. And so it's actually really easy for us to just like take an old app off the shelf and just fire it up and in our environment and start poking at it again. Yes?
To me, it's surprising that you managed to come up with these prototypes in just 2 or 3 days. I mean, that just seems really fast. Does it ever get like hectic because you're always working on something?
Oh, it's always hectic. It's madness. It's chaos. I'm the kind of person who thrives in that environment, so I like artificially create it for myself. So I always like really heavily warn people that you're stepping into, come work on the labs team, like you're stepping into this like sort of chaotic, very ADD like environment. And if a lot of people really are drawn to that, and a lot of people aren't, and that a lot of times like that's how we sort of figure out like who might be a better fit for our engineering team and who might be a better fit for something like labs. But that's the thing, like if you were starting a company tomorrow, and you're always fighting, there's always something you can be doing, you're always fighting to try and prove your idea. I mean, like that's where that all comes from, is from that whole early stage startup world. It's chaotic, it's kind of crazy, but it's a lot of fun too. I also like skydiving, so I guess I just like crazy, intense, chaotic experiences. Yes.
Given your description of being so intense, what steps do you take to avoid burnout?
That's an excellent question. Being totally honest, like that's something that I struggled with a lot in my career, and there's been times where, it's done me in. So I think that, going back to what I was talking about, the strong opinions but weakly held, that helps a lot because you sort of you don't take it quite as personally when things don't work out. It's always hard, but it helps definitely to do that. I also, I don't know, just make sure, there's a poster out there somewhere that's like the seven sure-for-hour ways to flunk out of school. And I don't know if you guys have seen that or not, but I walked by it and I was reading it and I was like, that's it's true. Make sure you're taking care of your health. Make sure that your priorities in life are where they need to be. Make sure that you're doing the things you need to do. If you need help or you need a break, get help or take that break. Yeah, those are things. It can be tough, but burnout sucks, and you don't want it. It's the worst feeling ever. So, don't go there. Go read that poster. Seriously, it's really good. Yes.
How many hours in a day or week do you normally work? Because I've heard that there are some startups that they work constantly and then they just.
If you would have asked me that question 6 years ago, I would have said 80 hours a week, which is the truth. And it was it could be Saturday night at 2 a.m. and you're drunk and you're out at a party and your phone starts buzzing because some server went down and it doesn't matter. You got to fix it's you. You got to fix it. You can't just say no. You can't just say I'll deal with it later. You're fixing it right now. So, and especially in this whole sort of always on thing, you can kind of always be working. So it's hard to tell because I guess I was always okay with that, but then I always would build in a lot of flexibility in my work days. So if I needed to go do something during the day, I would just go do it. If I need to go run an errand or whatever, because I knew it's all going to even out in the end. So nowadays I would say I don't work more than 45 to 50 hours a week, which has done wonders for the burnout thing too. Okay, well that's probably it. Oh, one more question over there.
How routinely do you create prototypes? 1 week or
Yeah, 1 a week. There's we have a really small team, and we like to shift gears a lot, and so we will sometimes create something where we're not done working on something else and sort of put it aside for a little bit, work on something else for a couple of days, come back to it. I'd like to maintain that kind of velocity of 1 a week, but sometimes it's every couple of weeks we think of something new. But there's there's just a ton of ideas that we're sitting on that we're this would be really cool, this would be really cool, this would be really cool. So there's always ideas we have in our idea bank, I suppose. All right, well we should probably get out of here. So thank you guys very much. Those of you who ask questions, I have T-shirts. So if you guys want T-shirts, unfortunately I don't have any of these T-shirts. We were totally out of those, but I do have Indeed Antarctica T-shirts, and the T-shirts. These are all limited edition T-shirts from our last hackathon. So, question people, come on down. Get a T-shirt. Thank you very much.